I first saw it at the top of the stairs. One moment the landing was empty, the dim bulb casting a weak circle of light, and the next, there it was, a figure rigid, unmoving, just beyond the last step. My chest clenched instinctively. Something was wrong. Everything about it screamed wrongness in a way I couldn't yet name. The hallway smelled of old wood and dust, like a forgotten room left to decay. Even before I saw the figure, the air had felt heavier, thicker, as if the house itself had leaned in closer. I froze, gripping the railing, my knuckles whitening. The stairs groaned beneath my weight. A single, drawn-out creak that seemed too loud, too pointed, for the otherwise silent house. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. Its silhouette was vaguely human, but the proportions were off. The head seemed slightly too large for the narrow shoulders. The limbs, well, I wasn't sure if they were longer than they should be or if the angle was wrong, like perspective had been bent to trick me. I blinked, and the shadow at the landing remained, unmoved, perfectly still. I wanted to call out. My voice felt caught somewhere in my throat, thick and reluctant. When I finally whispered my own name, it didn't respond, didn't stir. And yet I could feel it, like a pressure, soft but insistent, weighing on the back of my mind. The house itself made me uneasy. I had grown up here, in this tall, rambling structure, and I knew its quirks. The floorboards that bowed under your step, the way the hallways smelled different in winter than summer, the soft draft that whispered down the stairwell at night. Yet tonight all of that seemed wrong. Subtle inconsistencies crawled along the edges of my perception. The familiar scent of cedar and dust was tinged with something acrid, coppery. Shadows stretched across the walls in ways the lighting shouldn't allow. A picture frame that normally hung straight was slightly crooked, though I remembered adjusting it just yesterday. I forced my legs to move, climbing slowly, each step punctuated by a faint whine from the treads. The figure didn't flinch. No matter how many times my gaze darted upward, it remained exactly where it had first appeared. Its silence was more disturbing than anything else, the absence of sound in a house that creaked and whispered with every shift of its timbers. I tried to recall the last time I'd been up here. It had been years, and yet everything was familiar. The scuffed railing, the narrow corridor leading to my old bedroom, the faded wallpaper curling at the edges. But the furniture, though in the right places, felt wrong. Too heavy, too dark. I ran a hand along the balustrade, the varnish sticky under my fingers, as if it had absorbed the humidity of something I didn't want to name. The figure was taller than I remembered the ceiling to be. Its head brushed against the crown molding, yet it fit through the doorway without hesitation. I blinked. It didn't step forward, didn't retreat. I could feel the tension in my muscles coiling like wire. And then, inexplicably, the temperature changed. Not a gust of air, not a draft, but a subtle cooling that wrapped around me, moving upward from the stairs as though the figure's presence sucked warmth from the air itself. I climbed the final step, and for a brief instant, I thought it had turned its head toward me. But the angle was impossible. The figure's face remained featureless in the dim light, a shadowed void with nothing to read, no eyes, no expression, nothing. My own reflection in a nearby mirror jerked with me, confirming the stillness behind me. And yet, I was certain it had watched me, felt my fear, mirrored it. I noticed small details I hadn't before. The wallpaper near the landing was stained with something dark, smeared almost deliberately. A chair leaned against the wall at a slight angle, though I remembered pushing it flush with the floor just this morning. And on the floor, a thin ribbon of light caught the edge of something. A toy I'd once left here, a wooden soldier missing a leg. I remembered leaving it by the doorway, propped against the frame. But tonight it lay in the center of the hallway, upright, impossibly balanced. I stepped closer. Each movement felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the heating pipes, the distant echo of something dragging in the far corner of the house. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, a relentless drum that seemed to synchronize with the subtle sway of the figure above me. It remained motionless, silent. But now I noticed something new. The air vibrated slightly, like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting. I thought of my father, of the nights I had spent hiding under these same stairs, listening to his arguments with my mother. The memories were sudden, sharp, scents of alcohol, tobacco, and the iron tang of blood from an old cut I had long forgotten. The house had always held echoes, remnants of past events pressed into its walls, into its floors. But this wasn't a memory. This presence wasn't a trace of what had been. It was something that shouldn't be, and it had chosen this landing as its stage. I reached the top of the stairs. The figure's feet, obscured by shadow, hovered just above the floor, or perhaps they rested lightly. It didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't shift. I could see the subtle warp of the air around it, the way light bent oddly across its shoulders. I remembered the attic, a door I had always kept locked. My mother had warned me never to enter. My father had laughed about it, called it nonsense. Something in the back of my mind tugged at me. The figure seemed almost waiting, guiding. I stepped sideways, toward the doorway of my old bedroom. A draft hit me, carrying the smell of mildew, of old paper, of something metallic. And then I noticed the photograph on the wall. A younger me, smiling, holding hands with my mother and father. But the faces behind me in the photograph were blurred. Not by age or poor focus, blurred, deliberately erased. And now I noticed the pattern. Every shadow in the hallway matched, in some warped way, the figure's silhouette. My parents' shadows in the photo were unervingly long, unnaturally angled. I wanted to move backward, to retreat down the stairs, but my feet felt heavy, reluctant. The figure's stillness was oppressive, a weight pressing down on my spine, on my thoughts, on my memories. I felt like a child again, caught in a game I didn't understand, too frightened to scream. And then a whisper, a faint, almost inaudible exhale of air, slipped through the room. Not a voice, not words, but a direction, toward the attic. My curiosity, mingled with terror, propelled me. The attic door, once firmly shut, now hung slightly ajar. I approached, each step deliberate, measured, my senses stretched taut. A smell hit me, rotted wood, damp fabric, something coppery. The shadows in the room shifted as I drew near, and then I saw it, the last piece that snapped everything into place. A small, crumpled note, yellowed with age, tucked into the corner of the floorboards. It was my father's handwriting. Trembling, I read the single line. "He is still here, waiting where we left him." I looked up. The figure at the landing hadn't moved. But now I understood. It wasn't a stranger, not some intruder or intruding spirit. It was him or what remained after him. The father I remembered, the man whose shadow had loomed over me, whose presence had been oppressive and suffocating. But this was only the husk, preserved in the architecture of the house, a warped echo trapped in wood and air. It waited, motionless, silent, consuming the stairs, feeding on memory, feeding on the house itself. The last thing I felt, before I turned and stumbled back down the stairs, was the subtle shift in the air, the almost imperceptible tilt of the figure's head. And though it remained silent, motionless, I heard it in my mind. A slow, deliberate echo of my father's voice, warped and hollow, repeating the words I had once feared. "Come back. Stay." I ran. The stairs creaked under my weight. The house groaned, shadows stretched, and behind me, the figure did not follow. But I could feel it, waiting, always waiting. Its impossible stillness rewriting the room, the house, the memory of everything that had ever happened here. She heard someone whisper, "You're not alone," from the darkness behind her. The words were low, measured, almost deliberate, curling around her mind like smoke. They didn't echo. They existed precisely where she stood, in the air immediately behind her, and yet when she spun around, nothing moved. Only the empty hallway stretched away, swallowed in shadow. It had been hours since she arrived at the cabin, deep in the mountains, far from any road. The last stretch of trail had been a narrow ribbon of dirt and rocks, flanked by dense evergreens whose tops vanished into the fog. She'd come to escape the city, the noise, the constant pull of other people's expectations. The internet and phone signal had died long before the cabin appeared, and by the time she reached it, twilight had surrendered to a black so absolute it felt physical. Inside, the cabin smelled of cold pine and something older, faintly acrid, like charred wood or long-forgotten smoke. She had lit a single lantern on the kitchen counter, its glow cutting a small circle into the room but leaving the corners, the ceiling beams, and the far doorway shrouded. She had checked the lock on the heavy wooden door twice, then shrugged at her own nerves. The wind was picking up outside, and the pines groaned under it. The whisper had come first as a brush of sound, almost imagined, like the hiss of the fire across the stove. She had paused, turning her head slowly, listening, ears straining. The words crystallized then, "You're not alone." Her stomach clenched. The whisper was intimate, tailored to her. It knew how she was thinking, threading through her doubts and her fear. She had been alone for hours. Alone. She moved toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The floorboards creaked underfoot, uneven, warped, responding to her steps with faint echoes that seemed slightly delayed, as though the house itself were uncertain. Shadows clung to the walls, thick and restless. When she looked away even for a moment, the shapes shifted subtly. The door to the bathroom seemed closer than before, the window at the end of the hall farther. She shook her head, trying to force herself to think rationally. Old cabins shifted with the settling of timber. That was all. But the sense of being watched persisted. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, she imagined a movement in the periphery. Just a twitch, a bend of shadow where there should have been none. She told herself it was fatigue. Her imagination stretched thin from the hike, from the wind, from being completely alone in a place that had no other life besides hers. She lit another candle and set it on the floor near the hall's threshold. Its trembling flame cast elongated shapes across the walls, sending her own shadow sprawling and twisting unnaturally. And then she heard it again. "You're not alone." This time it wasn't just behind her. It was under her skin, close enough to touch her thoughts. She froze, hands pressing to her chest, eyes scanning the shadows. There was a subtle shift in the hall, an angle she hadn't noticed before, a line of the floorboards that seemed to extend farther than physics allowed. The air felt heavier, denser, as if the darkness had weight. She reached for the lantern and moved it slowly along the hallway. The edges of the room responded. Where the light touched, shadows recoiled slightly, but always just beyond, new darkness gathered, waiting. Every time she turned away, the shapes seemed to slide, reorganize, as though her attention gave them form. Her heart was pounding, but the whisper remained calm, patient. "You're not alone." The words now felt intelligent, aware. They weren't random. They responded to her hesitation, her thought patterns, as if they could feel her doubt and frustration. She could almost see it in the periphery. A thin outline where the wall met the ceiling, a suggestion of a figure crouched in the shadow, watching. She remembered a childhood story her grandmother had told her, about spirits that existed between attention and neglect, that fed on the perception of presence. She shook the thought away. It was silly, folklore. But the whisper had always been nearby, waiting for her dismissal. And now it felt colder, almost palpable, like ice brushed against her spine. The cabin seemed to breathe. The floorboards shifted subtly beneath her feet. A window rattled with wind outside, but the sound was uneven, as though the noise came from inside the walls. She thought she saw a curtain sway without breeze, and then it stopped the instant she looked directly. She fled into the bedroom at the end of the hall, slamming the door behind her. The room smelled of old linen and dust. She fumbled for the candle, her hands shaking. The flicker of flame revealed a dresser, a mirror, a bed neatly made. Nothing else. She leaned against the door, willing herself to calm down, telling herself she had reached the peak of paranoia. Then she heard it again, softer this time, almost coaxing. "You're not alone." She froze. The words came from inside the room. Her gaze darted to the corners. She tried to rationalize. A draft? An animal outside? but the darkness felt too precise, too deliberate. She could sense it lingering just beyond the candlelight, always beyond reach, in a place the eye couldn't quite hold. Her own reflection stared back from the mirror, pale, wide-eyed, chest heaving. But the reflection was slightly off. The angle of her shoulders didn't match. The tilt of her head seemed wrong, subtle but undeniably different. And then, almost imperceptibly, the shadow behind her in the glass didn't move when she did. The candle guttered. She dropped it. The flame's light disappeared, leaving her in total darkness. The whisper returned. Now several voices layered subtly over one another, intimate, almost conspiratorial. "You're not alone. You're not alone." She groped for the door, hands trembling. Her fingers brushed the frame. She tried to step through, but the space seemed to stretch. The hallway elongated impossibly, vanishing into pure black. The walls bent inward slightly, floorboards tilting, yet she didn't fall. The house itself had become an extension of the whisper. Her breathing echoed now, loud and ragged, mingling with another sound. A faint, measured pulse behind her, synchronized to her own heartbeat. She turned slowly. Nothing. But the whisper remained, so close it tickled her ear. "You're not alone." A cold, wet sensation brushed her neck. She flinched, spinning, but the room was empty. The whisper shifted tone, a subtle amusement, like it understood her panic and reveled in it. "We've been waiting, all of us." She stumbled backward, arms out, tripping over the rug that wasn't there moments before. The walls seemed to breathe again, expanding and contracting with her pulse. She wanted to scream, but no sound emerged. The voices whispered, circling, layering, indistinguishable yet intelligent. She pressed herself against the wall, chest tight, knees trembling. "I'm alone," she whispered desperately to herself. But the voice or voices answered immediately, impossibly close, inside her mind. "You never were, and you never will be." The candle flickered back into existence. A thin beam of light illuminated the room. Her eyes darted, but the corners of the room had changed. A figure crouched there, tall, impossibly slender, a silhouette that didn't seem to belong to any physical form. Its head tilted slightly as if studying her. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. Only the whisper remained. "You're not alone." She didn't move. She couldn't. Darkness pressed around her, and she understood with a terrible clarity that the cabin had never been empty. It had waited. It had always waited, and it would never let her leave. The candle guttered again, and the whisper lingered, patient, inevitable, curling around her thoughts like smoke. "You're not alone."